Good evening. It's good to be with you this evening for the second of our webinars. This is an experiment that we're trying to have a conversation. We've got together 5 people from around the Methodist connection to share in this talk. And we're looking at the question of memory and of the stories we tell to the next generation. And the stories that we tell influence the sort of society we shall build and that we want to be. We're going to try something to start with using a poll. Joe, do you think we can manage this? I've got a question for you all. Okay. George has always prepared the bread and wine for communion every month. When he died, the family donated a beautiful oak communion table with a plaque in memory of George facing the congregation. At the church meeting at which you are all present, do you agree to the plaque being displayed? Just answer yes, no. I suppose you can put don't know if you don't know either way. So just make your little choice now in the next 5 seconds. Then you need to press submit. I'm not quite sure what will happen then, but mine's gone. I've lost Sonia as well. Sonia, have you lost your video connection? Do we get a result of that, Joe, or
yeah,
no?
There are still a few votes coming in.
Okay.
Just give them a couple more seconds.
We're going to go ahead now and meet the panelists. I'm Andrew Baker, and I sort of moderate this or chair this. I'm the Superintendent Minister in the Strathclyde Circuit, which is in Glasgow, Joe, not Edinburgh.
Oh.
But
Sorry.
That's okay. And I've been here for 5 years, and I'm looking as if I might stay here for another 5 until I, in our Methodist way, sit down as a minister. In other words, I retire.
Andrew, so, I have the results of this poll. Would you like to see them?
Yes, please, Joe. Let's see. Oh, so 61% of you said no, 23% said yes, and 16%. That's a very interesting response. We'll hold that to the end, Joe. Thank you very much. That's nice. Please remember, as we go through, you can put a question in the Q&A section. That's how you communicate with us. But let's introduce the panelists. I'll just call them by the first name, and they'll say something about themselves. Richard.
Hi there. My name is Richard Knott. My connection with the Methodist Church is that I'm currently engaged in some part-time consultancy work for the connection in Scotland and Shetland, so working alongside Lorraine Darlow. And I'm currently in Edinburgh.
Great, Richard. What were you doing before you did this?
My main other job is actually with the United Reformed Church, actually based in the West Midlands Synod, which I only started in January. Prior to that, I worked 4 years for the United Free Church Scotland as a national children's and youth development worker for them. And prior to that, I spent 8.5 years with the Salvation Army as a children's officer with them in the west of Scotland.
Great, great. Richard is our storyteller. So we're glad to have you with us, Richard.
Thank you.
Laurent, do you want to say something about yourself?
So I'm Laurent Vernet. I'm based in sunny Strathclyde, which is the south of Glasgow. No, it's not. Okay, sunny Strathclyde, and I'm the minister there. I'm very, very interested in various forms of theology, and especially what we call alternative theology. So liberation theology, the womanist theology, or the queer theology as well. So that's why I'm here, I think.
Laurent, great to have you. Laurent's my colleague here. We've been working together for the last 2 years, and we get on quite well most of the time. Laurent, it's good to have you. Good to have you on the panel tonight. Sonia.
Hi, I'm Sonia Hicks. I live in Slough, where I'm working in the Methodist churches there. But I'm due to finish in August and go to Wembley, so a change for me. Oh, and I used to work with Andrew.
I've also worked together in the past. Took over the superintendency of that circuit after I left. She's great fun and a great colleague. Thank you for joining us today, Sonia.
You're welcome.
Peter.
Good evening, Andrew. I'm Peter Eaves. I'm based in Harrogate in Yorkshire. I've lived here all my life. I've been an architect for the last, nearly 40 years, and worked in private practice in my own business for the last 32 years. I go to Panel Methodist Church and actually have gone there on and off since, Panel being a village to the side of Harrogate. And I've been going to that church on and off since I was about 14 years old. So I was raised as a Methodist and continue that till today. I also went to school with Andrew.
Peter is my best and oldest friend, and yeah, we've been through a lot together over the years. And finally, Jill. Not my wife, Jill. This is a different Jill.
But I am often confused for your wife, I have to say. As our names are similar, but that's all. I'm here in Aberystwyth in Wales. So it's nice to be talking to Scotland. I initially trained as a history teacher. I've spent my career mainly working in libraries, archives and museums. And a couple of projects really that have given me a passion for this sort of subject. When I was Archive Education Officer in Westminster, I worked on a project to embed Black history in the school curriculum. And then later on, when I was in Hertfordshire at the time of the abolition, the bicentenary of the abolition of the transatlantic slave trade, I worked on trying to raise awareness amongst white British people how the wealth of our country is completely dependent on wealth that has come from the slave trade. And so there's two projects, so I think we'll feed into this tonight. So it's great. And I was also, like Andrew's wife, a former vice president of the Methodist Conference.
Great to have you, Jill. Thank you. Thank you for coming and joining us today. So I've got a few questions for you all. Richard, the Christian faith puts a lot of emphasis on the telling of stories. Why do you think that is? And why are stories so central to our faith?
Well, as you said, I'm a storyteller, and I just find that stories are so powerful, aren't they? I think it's important for us to remember that there was a time when the retelling of stories was the only way to pass on information, particularly from one person to the next, but particularly from one generation to the next. And it was particularly done, of course, through the oral tradition of storytelling. I think that's really a sort of important part of our history and who we are as people. The telling of stories is just part of our heritage. It's the way that we pass on our wisdom, our origins, dreams for the future even. They're a powerful way to build our identity and belonging as people. And primarily my work is with children and young people, and so stories are so key to helping children. They tend to sink deep inside each one of us into our consciousness. People have, of course, used and also abused the power of story, probably since time began. But stories do help us to remember. They can help us remember the things that are really important. I wonder if that's maybe why Jesus chose to tell stories so much while he was on earth. He wanted people to remember them, and he wanted them to be able to remember those stories and to tell other people about them right throughout the generations. So that's why I think story is so important.
Thank you. Yeah, great. And we look forward to you perhaps telling us a story later on. That would be good. Some of the stories that have been passed on to us, I think we're a bit uncomfortable with. And perhaps as a Methodist minister, I might say that the stories that have emphasized a masculine God have rather caused a disturbance, really, in our understanding of God. And the Jesus picture that we see in our churches of blue eyes and long blonde hair, that story is maybe not always helpful. Any comments on that?
Well, yeah, but interesting, isn't it? One of the key storytelling approaches that I utilise myself is the approach of godly play. And what I really like about the godly play approach is that it sticks largely to a script, and that script sticks to the original narrative largely, and tries not to add interpretation or add meaning to those stories. And particularly the materials that are used. So you mentioned that image of the kind of Swedish Jesus, blonde hair, blue eyes, walking down the beach. The materials that we would use within godly play would deliberately be quite neutral, and to allow people to then, imagine or interpret what that might have actually looked like for themselves. So I think I appreciate what you're saying there. There has perhaps been that tendency in the past to embellish stories or to put our own interpretation and meaning into stories rather than simply retell the story and allow the story to speak for themselves. And so I think if we do that, then we can avoid some of those dangers that you highlight, Andrew.
Okay, thank you for that. I still have a few questions about one or two of the stories that there are in the Bible, and so I'm going to ask all those who are with us tonight. That's not just the panelists, but those of you who are part of the webinar. I wonder if you might put into the Q&A any story from the Bible that you wish wasn't there, that you'd quite like to take out. If there's a story in the Bible that you'd quite like to take out because it doesn't really fit with the God that you believe in, just pop that in the Q&A. We might have a chance to look at it a bit later. Richard, do you want to come back?
I was just going to say, it's interesting the way you've put that, because there is quite often a wondering question within the godly play approach about, I wonder which part of the story you would happily leave out and still have all the story that you need. So
thank you. Well, I wonder which story you'll take out. Laurent, Christians claim these days that God is very real in the now, and they emphasize that Jesus is real now. So what's the point in remembering this story, something that happened 2,000 years ago? And if you remember some of the stories from the Hebrew scriptures, that's even longer ago. It kind of suggests perhaps that religion's stuck in the past and not real for the present.
Well, religion, not only Christianity, but religion in general, are looking at the eternal, the eternity, what was right in the past, what is right now, and what will be right in the future. And when I always say right, I don't mean in a moral sense, maybe more about what is true. And this question of eternity is always a difficulty. There's a lot of people, including people from churches, who like us to be stuck in a kind of golden age, i.e. in the past, maybe an age which never existed. And very often this golden age is sent to the early church, like if early church was wonderful, everything wonderful. But we know by looking very close to the scriptures, it was not a golden age. Golden age of what exactly? Even the time of Jesus was a time of suffering. It was a time of difficulties. So to believe that the past was a golden age and we always try to go back, it is very much problematic. It's not what Jesus was telling us. As religion, and I think specifically as Christian, we are here to interpret the eternal in our context, in today's context. So it's to find Christ in today's context. Christ said something very, very important, and which is at the heart of our faith. He said, "Do this in remembrance of me," which is at the heart of the big fight between different factions of Christian, what remembrance means, which is very much at the heart of our subject tonight. And do this in remembrance of me, as I say, is very much at the middle of our Christianhood. We can't change the past. And maybe we can even question if we can very genuinely, fully redeem the past. We have to live with our past. But I think as Christian duty, and this is why the presence of Christ is important, is we have to try to do the things right now. Maybe not necessarily correcting what has been happening in the past, but try to do it now, thinking for the future. We have very little influence on the future, but we are called to act now. So as Christian and as many churches, the challenge for many churches is to embrace the now. I think the COVID-19 have forced many churches to rethink about their tradition and to look very much in the now and reacting in the now. And a lot of lovely things came out of it. Maybe not everything, but a lot of lovely things came out of it. So yes, there's always this temptation, and very often for people outside the church, to claim that the church is a kind of bastion of the past, a bastion of this golden age never existed, where in fact many people in the church are trying to be living in the now and bringing and finding Christ in the now.
Okay. Does the Jesus story, though, not have an impact on the now?
Oh, well, yeah. Do you want to develop your question, or do you, is that your question?
That is the question, really. I'm saying, you know, although you're talking about the presence of Christ in the now, that Christ is the same Jesus who walked the earth.
Yeah.
His story.
Yes. Well, you know, because we discussed that a lot, Andrew, about the interpretation of the presence of Christ and the influence of us now. But his message is so modern, is so realistic for us now. I'm not talking about atonement and all these things who are very much not for the point for tonight. But I think as an incarnated God present among us, all his message, all his ministry is definitely time now. And when you're reading very carefully, not necessarily with the eyes of tradition and orthodoxy, like some of us have sometimes are very tempted, when we're looking at what he said in the context where he was living, on the occupation of the Romans, about all these kind of things, there is a lot of things for us now to learn. And I think that is the beauty of our Bible.
Thank you. Great. Sonia, your family roots are in the Caribbean. You've spent quite a bit of time in the Caribbean as a mission partner. Do you think the story of the Caribbean people's journey and the Caribbean people's history has been valued and appreciated here in Britain?
I think the simple answer to that is no. I think many people don't seem to realise that in the early 50s and mid 50s, people from the Caribbean were invited to come, were requested to come to help build up the country. So there was an invitation which they accepted. And they accepted that invitation because this was the mother country. They were British citizens and they were going to help other people. And that's often lost in all the rhetoric about all these foreigners coming in. It's lost that these people were invited and how generous they were to come and work in a country which was cold and miserable, to come and work and to pay their taxes, to help build up the country, which they did all of their own volition because they wanted to help the mother country. I think what is also missing from the story is that those people were in the Caribbean because they were forcibly removed during slavery. Bob Marley says, stolen from Africa and brought to America. I cannot trace my family history beyond a certain point because of slavery, because of the intervention of Britain into that story. And that cannot be given back to me. I have lost it. It is gone forever. But what we're also not told is that Black people didn't just arrive in the 50s or after the First World War. They have been here for as long as this story's been told. So there were the Aurelian Moors who were found in Cumbria, not far from where you are, in 253 AD. There is the story of the ivory bangle lady who was buried, and on her tomb it said, "Hail sister, may you live in God." She was a Christian, found in York in the 3rd century, and she was black. So our story goes way, way back. And if you want to go even, you can go into the middle of London and look at Trafalgar, at Nelson's column, and one of the reliefs on that, around the column in bronze, there is an African person. And it's not just because somebody who cast it thought, oh, it might be nice to put other people in it. It's because there were at least 6 West Indians serving with Nelson on Trafalgar. There were 123 who went to the battle and fought on behalf of Britain. So we go way back into the story, and we have helped build up this country, not just through slavery and the sugar trade and all of that, but just always. So I think it's time that we actually told the complete story, and not just the story of, well, you were once a slave.
Thank you. Have we in the Methodist Church, in the Christian Church, neglected the story of the black people within our midst? I mean, we have many churches that are majority black churches. Do you feel that as a church we've missed the boat?
I think the story is, especially when you think about in the southeast, you know, in the big cities, the Methodist Church would have collapsed without black people who went and through not always staying when it was all awful, they stayed and tried to be part of that community. And I think that it's not recognised, but I think that we just have to, it only helps if we all tell the story. So if I tell the story, I'm only a small fraction of the Methodist Church. We have to all tell the story and the complete story. Somebody put on the Q&A, isn't history always told from the side of the winners? Except in the Bible, because the Jewish people were taken into exile. So they were not the winners, and yet their story appears there. So maybe God isn't always on the side of the winners. Maybe God looks at those who are the underclass and says, you know what, their story is also important as well. So Lauren, you keep reading that womanist theology.
I mean, you've brought a huge amount, you personally and your family have brought a huge amount to my story. Your story has connected with my story over the years, and you have in many ways shaped who I am today. So I thank you for sharing your story and your food with me. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Peter, you come from a slightly different perspective from most of us, in that your work is to do with buildings. In your experience, what part does history and tradition and so on play in town planning, in putting up city centres and whatever?
So I've thought about this, and I hope you'll forgive me for sort of reading what I've written, but with the exception of new towns, the form of a town or city evolves over time, the result being buildings and spaces between them reflecting the time that they were created. This evolution means that the built environment at any one point is made up of buildings from different eras, for example, Victorian, Edwardian, the modern movement of the early 20th century, and all styles between up to the present day. In terms of development, so in my work, the thing, if we are doing any development within towns and cities, we have to submit planning applications for those developments. And whilst the local authorities tend to have their own sort of local plan, which establishes the principles of development, there are two specific building types of, well, we have conservation areas, and we have listed buildings that attract sort of more specific regulation. Conservation areas generally apply to areas of special architectural or historical interest, the character of which is worthy of preservation or enhancement. A precautionary approach to the loss or alteration of buildings or, in fact, trees. There is no specific planning application required for a conservation area, but it does mean that more specific attention will be given to developments in those areas in both towns and cities. It also introduces a general control over the demolition of listed buildings. In the United Kingdom, that includes the 4 nations, there are approximately 8,500 conservation areas. So in each of the towns or cities that the panel come from, then there will be any number of conservation areas attracting that kind of authority. Local authorities designate conservation areas and are under the positive legal duty to assess and review those areas from time to time. So the important thing there is that there needs to be, that when local authorities establish a conservation area or decide a particular area should be a conservation area, there needs to be a clear definition of the reasons for designation that will ensure that the reviews they carry out relate to those reasons. The next sort of the other historical issue with buildings is the issue of listed buildings. These are overseen by one of the 4 statutory lists maintained by Historic England, Historic Environment Scotland. I think you'll forgive me, it's CADW, is that Cadw Wales? Yeah, Cadw, and the Northern Ireland Environment Agency. A listed building may not be demolished, extended or altered without special permission from the local authority. And then we also, if there's any work to be done to a listed building, then in my work we have to submit a specific listed building application. Most sites on the list are buildings, but listings can cover bridges, monuments, sculptures, milestones, and even the Abbey Road zebra crossing made famous by the Beatles. So kind of in the majority of listings come from post-Second World War in England, with Scotland acting earlier, doing a survey of 103 towns and villages on the Amsterdam model in 1936. So in terms of my, as architects, we work with the local planning departments to develop proposals which respect, for example, the character of the conservation area, which adapt to current day needs a listed building whilst preserving the features of the listed building worthy of protection, to create buildings which will both address the needs of the people who will use them and sit well in the context of the area where the building is to be built.
Right, that all sounds quite technical.
Sorry if that's
all right, that's
technical.
Okay. I mean, I think it asks us a lot of questions about what is it then about a building that means we ought to conserve it. I mean, what of our history is actually worth conserving?
Well, we have a very interesting situation at the moment where we have a planning application in for some almshouses in Harrogate, and they're listed buildings, and these houses the trustees are wanting to modernise them for the people who are living in them to bring them up to current day standards, and we are encountering great difficulties with the local authority conservation officer, who is coming at it from the position of preservation, regardless of what we were actually trying to achieve. So that's an interesting question.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, memory, buildings holding memories. I mean, we're haunted in churches by the problem of memory there, and the building contains the memory. And how many have I wanted to knock down and start again? But Jill, I've got quite a, well, I know you could probably talk for 3 hours on this, but we've seen the pictures on the television of the statues and so on. Should we support current campaigns to remove controversial statues, take down historical buildings, or is this airbrushing the past? Does it matter anyway?
Okay, yes, we should support, and it does matter, but actually I think I would say that removing the statues is probably actually the easy bit. I think the important thing is the debate that this movement, these campaigns around statues is generating, and the most important thing is actually to listen. To actually listen to what people feel, to listen to the racism that Black people experience every day, to listen to the pain that's been expressed. And I think there are some really deep wounds there that won't heal unless we can listen. So I think that's the first thing that the statues debate raises. And thinking about it too, although I don't condone violence, I do think sometimes we need to engage in direct action. And Jesus did that in the temple. And if we think of that statue in Bristol, Edward Colston, people have patiently been asking it to be taken down for years. And nobody did anything. So I would have taken part in that. I'd have helped to heave him down. I think that was right. But on the whole, I wouldn't say we should remove statues. I do think there perhaps is a danger from, we don't want to deny our history or destroy it, but we definitely need to move them. And I would say they need to be moved into museums where they can be interpreted properly and put in their context, and people can be helped to engage with what is a very uncomfortable and very messy history. Now, I know some people have said that if we take them down, it's airbrushing our history, and we should leave them where they are, and we should change the plaques on them. But I don't know about you, but how many people actually ever go and read a plaque on a statue? And they don't. And most people probably don't even see the statues. We get this sort of everyday blindness of our surroundings, really. We don't even notice them after a while. And I think that's dangerous. Because subconsciously, what statues like that does is it creates unconscious bias. Because what it is, statues are representing, these are people that we need to look up to, we need to honour. So what are the values that we're actually supporting? It's legitimising injustice to have them there, and we don't even realise the bias it's creating in us. And I have to say, that what it's telling us is the people that matter in our society, the people that we are meant to look up to, are usually, almost exclusively, white men, and also rich white men, because who gets a statue, who gets their name on a building? It's people with money. They're usually, it's money made from exploiting other people. So it stinks, basically. So unconscious
You
bias.
sound very angry today. You sound very angry, really. Can I keep going? You're all right.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Okay. I mean, the key thing is education, and that goes back to what Sonia was saying. People haven't a clue about our history. They talk about, we've got to preserve our history. They don't know what they're talking about. The history we've got and the history we learn in our schools is incomplete, it's inaccurate, and it's biased. And we've really got, and we never learn about the history of other countries. My education on the history of the Caribbean, for me, dramatically, it was reading Andrea Levy's Small Island. And I think that should be compulsory reading in schools for everybody. I learned so much from that. So when we talk about history, we've really got to address that, not just in the schools, because I think adults, people my age, are as pig ignorant as anybody. We've got to, perhaps through our churches maybe, address the lack of education, because that's what leads to a lot of the bias. People don't even realise they've got this bias. The other thing I want to say is that it's not just taking the statues away. We've got to think, what are the new statues we want to put in their place? it's actually thinking, it's down to story again. What are the stories we want to tell now? Who are the role models we want to celebrate in our public places? Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, had a few good suggestions, and one I really would like to campaign for is having a statue of the Windrush people around, because as Sonia said, they came, we asked them, they helped the nurses, the bus drivers, all the infrastructure after the war. Let's celebrate it. Where's our Windrush statue? So that's something I would campaign for. And I think we pray in the Lord's Prayer, your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. And if we're going to work for God's kingdom on earth, then we've got to have a fairer society. And to do that, it's got to be more representative of everybody, so everyone can feel valued. And that's got to be represented in our public spaces. In our public spaces, everybody needs to be able to see someone that looks like them represented there. And that's the way that we will help to give everybody value and help everybody to fulfill their God-given potential.
So you don't want fewer statues, you want more statues of the right people.
Well, we just move the old statues into museums. Museums are great because we do education, and really those uncomfortable histories need time spending on them. So let's do them in proper spaces. But yeah, then let's think of some new statues. So who we want. I liked Trafalgar Square, always had the fourth plinth. I don't know, it's a long time since I lived in London. Don't know if it's still like it. They used to change the statue on the fourth plinth. And I used to look forward to going to see the latest one. And that was really challenging and so very interesting. Not always people. And that was very, so yeah, we can change things. Things aren't set in stone, actually. History isn't set in stone. We rewrite history all the time.
So we could take Cecil Rhodes down from that building that's been there all those years. That's part of our history. It's okay.
Cecil Rhodes was a white supremacist who stole African land, and he needs to be removed. We need to, not to forget, because we need to know the story. So heritage is hugely important, because we need to look at the past to understand where we are now, and that is what's going to enable us to hopefully make things better in the future.
Okay. So I like the suggestion about putting the statues in the museums. Has anybody else got any suggestions from the panel as to what we might do with these statues? Laurent, you look as if you... Oh dear.
Through my travel in East Europe, I've noticed a lot of countries will have parks with the former statues of Stalins and Lenins. A lot of them didn't destroy them, but put them in parks with a very specific theme and education. Because sometimes museum is not necessarily a place where the general public will go. There's a very specific, and I know, Jill, it's maybe but very often it is not as democratic as we would like, where a park tends to be a little bit more open. But also, I just would like to add on, Jill, if it's possible, the concern I have on interpreting the statues is only focusing on the statues. What would be interesting is our reaction over time for the statues. The fact that we forgot to look at what they were really 100 or 200 years after, that would be part of the education as well. It's not just to blame the past, but it's also to blame ourselves, the way we react to the past and the way we read the past.
Sonia, yeah.
I have to say, Bill talked about having new statues, and my sisters live in London, and we were so excited when they put up a statue of Mary Seacole.
Yes,
who also went to the Crimea, but who, you know, and actually spent all her own money to get there because no one would send her. She went from Jamaica and she helped with the soldiers. We just went as 3 sisters from Jamaica to just go and see the statue and cheer. Yeah, somebody like us. And I mean, it was so exciting. I don't think I've ever gone to look at a statue and been so excited by it and so moved by it. And so that's a great thing. but you have to go and look for that one because she's sort of like hidden away a bit. But you can find her. And we were just so pleased. It was a beautiful moment, me and my sisters and this statue.
I mean, I'm rather ashamed to say I think there is only one statue to a woman in Glasgow. So I am a bit ashamed of that. And I'd love to go back to Peter in a way and say that so many of our buildings speak of bigness and power and the vast wealth of the Victorian era, and we're not there anymore.
No, it is.
Peter, no, go ahead, Peter. Yeah.
But it is just the thing of preserving buildings for the sake of it, which loses the purpose. I mean, on the statues, there is I've read recently where the fact that these statues were put up in the days when people didn't know what people looked like, whereas now we have thousands of photographs of any people of our time now. And whether there's actually a need for any statues at all, really. Why do we need to put anybody on a plinth?
Yes, no, I think that is a good question. Is it okay, Richard, to tell stories about these great characters? Does that do any good? You know, we do the Winston Churchill thing, and the United Kingdom Prime Minister models himself on this story of this great Prime Minister. Is that okay to tell that story again and again?
Well, to try not to get into the political argument that you've almost led me into there, Andrew, whether that's an appropriate link or not, I'll try not. But yeah, I think the great thing about stories is they are open to interpretation, aren't they? So whether it's then okay. So I really like Jill's idea of adding new things in. So if you disagree with someone's interpretation, then you bring in the bit that you feel is missing, or you make sure that the essence of the story as you interpret it is then told in some other way or in some other form. And so we add the bits that are missing. Might be my way of responding to that. Don't know what others think about that as an idea.
Okay. Jill, did you want to add anything? Sorry, Sonia, come back to you. Sonia.
I went to visit my daughter in Dundee, and went to a hotel, and this beautiful letter from Winston Churchill complaining about everything, and then being told that Winston Churchill was chased out of Dundee. That's the whole story, isn't it? That's another bit of the story that the Prime Minister in Westminster doesn't seem to get, that actually no one is all brilliant. We're all made up of shades of grey. And it's important to remember that. Yeah. And in a sense, I think when Peter talks about putting people on the plinth, you then tend to forget that they are shades of grey, that no one is perfect. We're all made up of good and bad. And that's the problem. We need to remember that.
And that's true of the biblical characters as well, isn't it? You know, they've all read through scripture and those biblical stories, and we see people making mistakes and falling and denying God or whatever. And yeah, we need to tell all those stories so that we have that full picture and all those shades, as you say, Sonia, absolutely.
Yes, Jill.
On the Bible stories bit, the problem is we don't do that. And my big beef with the Old Testament stories is that we think they're suitable for children. And you set up so many inconsistencies. Jacob and Esau, Jacob cheating Esau out of his birthright, and yet we're told that Jacob is the good one, that God favours, and yet he's a cheat and a rotter. And I think, why do we tell that story to children? How, what are we doing? So they're not children's stories because we do have to, they're much messier than that, and yet we do it all the time.
Well, sorry, just to jump in, I think I would challenge the assumption that children can't understand some of that we underestimate their ability to see mess in life, and that everything isn't straightforward and fit into a nice neat box. I think we do them a disservice, actually, if we try to make the Bible too simple and too easy, because they're going to grow up one day and read those bits that we've decided to miss out and go, hang on a minute, what else have you told me? Is this all nonsense? So I would actually argue, just to come back at you a little bit, I think I would say it's actually important to tell all of the story and give them opportunity to wrestle with it.
Because there isn't the problem, Richard, that exactly what Jill said at the end, where she said Jacob is looked upon as the goody. That's where we put the interpretation in, isn't it? We don't just tell the story, we then say Jacob was the goody. Yes, Sonia?
I have never said that Jacob is the goody. I've said this is not, when we look at it with our eyes, it's not fair. God doesn't work the way that we do. So God doesn't say, you know what, just because you've messed up, I can't use you. God can use anybody. And that's what I think, to me, is powerful about that story. So I think we need to be careful. And I think we do need to say I think Rita's right. Children have a greater capacity to deal with mess than we ever can, and I think sometimes the Bible doesn't have, often the Bible doesn't have clear heroes or heroines. They just have messed up people who God happens to use. And that gives all of us hope, I think.
Absolutely.
Our boys obviously did their primary education, or most of it, in the Caribbean, and they grew up with the Caribbean history, and they grew up with the story of slavery, and came back to Britain to find that nobody else knew that story. But that is a story that they've been able to tell. Yeah, great. That's exciting. We have one or two questions that have been coming through. Please put your questions up. We've got a few minutes left. If you've got any questions, somebody's asked about this question about it's been said that history is written by the winners. How do we change that? How do we change the fact that history is written by the winners? I think we've had a few suggestions already, but anybody want to add to that? How do we deal with the fact that history is written by the winners? And yet, some of you have suggested already that God is on the side of the losers. Jill?
I think in the past it's true to say that history was written, well, again, by men, by the powerful, by the winners. I think that's less true today, but we need to make sure it continues. There are so many projects like Hidden Histories that are looking at the voices, we've actively got to look for the voices that have not been heard, but that is happening more. History from the bottom up is much more, not just acceptable, but welcome today. But I think we all have a responsibility to look for where are the missing voices and make sure that those stories are heard.
Okay. Yes, Laurent, sorry. Yeah, Laurent.
Yeah, I completely agree with Jill. I think, but every story, if there's only one interpretation, is dangerous because it's only one aspect of the story.
Yeah.
So as we said earlier on, even Bible stories are not a problem. It's their interpretation which is a problem. And if it is a mono interpretation, it's even more a problem. Any story, any interpretation need to have different views to be able to have a free dimension. And there's no problem with past. If it has been written by the winners, you need to take it as it is, but you need to be critical and you need to take the other views. And you can learn from both views, but you need to be critical. And I think that is the beauty of religion. A lot of people see religion or Christianity as something very monolithic. It is not. And we learn from each other because we have different views. And I think the whole things about stories and the whole thing about remembrance bring us directly at the heart of these issues, looking from different point of views.
Yes, Sonia, yeah.
And it's like if you read a newspaper, say Liverpool winning the cup, right? If you read the Liverpool Echo, it'll be, we were wonderful, we had this, we were miracle workers, right? You read the Manchester Evening Times, it'll say we were robbed. We know this. So I think that we have to always think, what am I not hearing? And it's always good, I think, therefore, not to just read one newspaper or deal with one outlook. My daughter's starting to listen to Al Jazeera news because she says the BBC is always taking it in a certain way. and she just needs every now and then to hear a different voice. I think that's true. So, you know, the people who love the Daily Mirror need to every now and then go and read the Daily Express. The people who love the Daily Express need to every now and then go and read the Guardian, just so that we are hearing those other voices and we're not getting caught into some sort of place where we're only hearing one voice all the time.
Yeah, I mean, some of us were brought up, Sonia, in a generation of fear of Black people. You know, I speak from myself as a child, remembering some of the things that were told to me by the elder generation, and a fear of difference, a homophobia was part of our upbringing. I mean, I look at Peter and say that was part of our upbringing was a fear of all that stuff, because we weren't seeing the other story, and I think I'm hearing a very different story now, and I'm thankful for the people who've been telling me a different story. So yeah, thank you, Peter.
But there is still that fear. I mean, people generally are scared of something that's different. They have fear of it. I mean, and it's still there.
Yeah.
It's, say, you talk about Al Jazeera, so you can say that if we see women with the veil and the whole of their bodies covered up, then we have people have a reaction to that. So it's just because well, for a number of reasons you might, but there's just in every area of life. I mean, you talk about homophobia, it's still there. It is, regardless of how people may talk about it being liberal and accepting of everything that now happens more in the open, but there's still the same, people still talk in the same derogatory way about that. And about, yes, with racism, etc.
So every time I see a Union Jack, I go immediately back to being a teenager and seeing the BNP with it.
Yeah.
So I don't find that a helpful part of history of this country. I find it really scary. And I think people don't recognize that because they've never been on the other side of it. So, you know, when people say, oh, let's fly a flag, let's fly the Union Jack, to me, that is so scary. Because all I know about that is that people who flew Union Jacks in the past in London were people who belonged to the BNP, who didn't want to see anybody who was different, and actually, if they saw us in the street, would beat us up.
Yeah, somebody's put in the chat about the possible remembrance, the possible telling of the story can be very tribal. And divisive. Yes, Laurent.
Yeah, I've noticed that in the last, I would say maybe 10 years, but more recently, maybe last year and the year before, is the use of poppies, you know, for remembrance for the First World War. These poppies appearing more and more on the far right side, and also other political agenda using historic momentum, trying to bring forward their own agenda, which is very dangerous, which is about using the history, using a kind of interpretation of the past for the benefit of a present agenda. And I think if we are not careful, and especially talking about the poppy, it could be claimed and misused and completely defiled, and people will not recognize themselves in what it is at the moment. So this history is not just the past, it's we are living history and we are building tomorrow's history. And it's why it's so important to be very vigilant and not let one group taking over our current history, because that would be very, very dangerous.
Yes, Peter.
Well, just on the flag is that the flag also now has became associated. So if you go down the Mall in London when there's, say, an official visit happening, then the flag seems to look okay there. But if you, like Sonia says, if you see it hanging outside somebody's house in the recent months, so in the last year, it's to do with Brexit, and that was such a partisan thing that happened to the whole country, where there was, as Laurent talks about, establishing history, then that's another phase of history where the flag has become symbolic of the people who wanted to pull up the drawbridge and keep everybody safe in the United Kingdom. So.
Thank you. I wonder if Richard, I don't know where you come from on this, but do you think there's something about the Scottish story in we're obviously coming now from Scotland. Is there something about the Scottish story not having been told?
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? I was thinking, as you were talking about the flags, actually, how people will say that a certain view on Scotland's future has been, a certain group have decided to take possession of the Scottish flag, and just how powerful that symbol has been. So, yeah, the Scottish story, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, there's this kind of strong, pride is the only word I think that isn't there, about being Scottish, and in some ways that ties into that whole kind of political argument about what should Scotland's future be, and you don't want to be tied to the rest of the UK any longer, thanks very much, because of how some of us feel. Scotland's, I've never thought about that. You caught me a little bit off guard there, Andrew. Scotland's story. It's interesting. One of the little projects I've been involved in, just for a minute, is with the Connection, Methodist Church Connection, is to produce, to research and then hopefully to produce some kind of story, some kind of narrative in terms of Methodist Church history within Scotland. What is the history of the Methodist Church in Scotland? How did it come here? And what that look like, and what can that maybe tell us about who we are now? So, it'd be interesting to see how that develops. Maybe
great.
Might be an answer to your question.
Look forward to that. I know we're getting quite close to our finishing time. I'm sorry that I haven't come to all the questions in the Q&A. It's quite interesting if you go there to read some of the bits that people would like to airbrush out of the Bible story. A bit scary, really, some of them. So, but I'm not going to read those out. Yes, interesting. People saying that they're proud to be Scottish. They're proud to be Cornish. They're proud to come from Yorkshire, whatever it might be. And the story can become quite tribal in that. And we in the west of Scotland do suffer quite badly from that story, which has been so divisive in the past. But it's a selective story. However, it depends who's telling it. You have been an amazing panel. Thank you. What a wide variety of opinions and expertise you've brought, really. Thank you for that so much. And I would have liked to have asked everybody in a poll to say, would they have joined Jill in pulling down the statue? Would you have actually been there? Would you have been there? And pulled Colston into the harbour? We'll come back and do another webinar in the autumn. We'll perhaps look at something on the environment, which is another really pressing issue at the moment that needs to be tackled right now. And I noticed there was quite a lot of discussion today at Methodist Conference about fossil fuels and investment in fossil fuels. This is a pressing issue. So we'll look at that in the autumn. My thanks to all of you who've taken part, Richard, Peter, Laurent, Jill, Sonia, to Joe, who's done the technical stuff, and perhaps you might just want to say one last goodbye, each of you, starting Richard.
Thank you for the invitation to be involved. It's been a really, really interesting discussion. So thank you to one and all.
Good to have you with us. Peter?
Thank you very much. Yes, it's been interesting to hear everybody's different opinions. It's been good. Thank you.
See you again soon. Yeah, Laurent.
Yeah, thank you very much for all of you and all the attendees as well. There's a lot of questions, a lot of messages, so I don't know what we can do about it, but I think we think about it, because there's some very, very good question, very interesting points. Keep talking, keep
talking.
having
Let's
the conversation.
Let's talk.
Religion, it's all our Christian church is about talking, so make some noise. Whatever the subject is, just make noise.
Sonia.
Yeah, it was great to share with you all and to learn different ways of telling stories. So thank you very much.
See you again soon. See you, Jill.
It's been great. I've enjoyed it. And I'm just thinking now, what about our churches? Maybe we need to go back when we can get into them and just see, are there things there that we actually need to remove?
George's plaque. Start with George's plaque. Night, night. God bless.
Bye.
See you all again.
Bye.